This video is sponsored by Classic Football Shirts, the best place to get your classic and vintage football shirts. To get cheap retro Palace shirts, click the link in the description below. And for an extra 10% off, use the code CFSPJ10 at checkout. Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast, I'll be looking over the game against Everton by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson and Alexander Sørloth after the game. So let's begin. Palace fell to their first defeat at Goodison Park since 2005, as Everton netted 3 second-half goals to condemn Roy Hodgson's team to just their third defeat in their last 16 Premier League games. After a promising first half from a Palace perspective, they quickly found themselves 2 behind just after the restart, when Gylfi Sigurdsson netted his third goal in his last 4 starts against the Eagles, and just 5 minutes later Oumar Niasse followed up his strike in a corresponding fixture in November by converting a simple header. Davies then added the all-important third with 15 minutes remaining to ensure that Sam Allardyce was the happiest manager on his first reunion with his former club. But despite Luka Milivojević netting his penalty of the season late on, Roy Hodgson's team couldn't stage an unexpected comeback. Despite what the final scoreline suggested, the opening 45 minutes saw both teams struggle to create anything in the final third, and that meant all the early attempts would only come from distance. The first came after 8 minutes when Sigurdsson saw a shot from 25 yards bounce just wide, and soon after Milivojević missed by a similar distance after Alexander Sørloth's first Eagles involvement saw him outmuscle Martina to create a chance. With no clear-cut sights on goal, it took 26 minutes for either goalkeeper to dirty their gloves, but Wayne Hennessy was ready when called upon. A poor corner by Sigurdsson was headed clear by Christian Benteke and fell to just a guy 35 yards out, and after trickling his way past Johan Cabaye, he fired goalwards, but Hennessy did well to tip it around his post. Shots from range continued to be the theme of the opening half, and Cabaye forced Jordan Pickford to unconvincingly edge a dipping effort to safety using his chest, but in the final minute of the first half, the Eagles came the closest to taking the lead into a changing room when Sørloth found Benteke at the far post who headed goalwards, and James McArthur was the stud's length away from diverting the attempt past Pickford. But just 45 seconds after the restart, the hosts got ahead through a familiar foe. Niasse held up the ball in a dangerous position and laid it off into the path of Sigurdsson, who wrapped his right boot around the ball first time, saw it deflect with the diving James Tompkins to beat Hennessy to score or assist against the Eagles for the 5th consecutive game. And things got worse for Hodgson's team 5 minutes later when they fell 2 goals behind. Davies won the ball back on the edge of the Palace box and slipped in Martina, who spotted Niasse in acres of space and chipped the ball towards him, allowing the Senegalese striker to powerfully head home to add to the visitors' woes. Within minutes there was a golden chance for them to get back into the game, when a racking diagonal pass by Cabaye was perfect for Benteke, who had elapsed from John Joe Kenny. But the Belgium's header dropped just wide of Pickford's far post, much to the striker's despair. However, the England shot stopper was called into action when Alexander Sørloth got between 2 defenders to meet a patch of an out cross, but saw his powerful header tipped wide. With those chances going begging, Palace's task grew harder, and with 50 minutes to go, Everton added their third. Kenny squared into the box to Niasse, who saw his deflected shot spin goalwards and needed parrying by a sprawling Hennessy. But Sigurdsson reacted quickest and cut the ball back into the danger area, where Davies was on hand to tap it in. With 8 minutes to go, the Eagles were handed the opportunity for a consolation, when they earned a penalty after an acrobatic attempt by Benteke was blocked by the hand of Ashley Williams, and Milivojević stepped up to score in similar fashion to his spot kick against Newcastle 6 days earlier, to register his 7th goal of the campaign, but it was too little, too late. Crystal Palace returned home pointless from their latest trip to Merseyside as they lost out 3-1 against Everton on Saturday. The Eagles were left ruining a few defensive errors in the second half as Everton scored 2 goals in the first 6 minutes of that half, before Everton added a third 15 minutes from time. And although Luka Milivojević scored from the penalty spot 7 minutes from time, it wasn't enough for Palace to get anything from the game. So what did we learn on Merseyside? Here are 5 things. Number 1, a costly 6 minutes. After doing so well in the first half to contain and frustrate Everton, all of Palace's hard work was undone in 6 second-half minutes, as the hosts took advantage of a couple breaks falling away to open up a 2-goal lead. Palace will look back at the defending and will be disappointed, with a couple of errors and lapses in concentration being punished by the Toffees. Number 2. Alexander Sørloth shows promise. The Norwegian striker was handed his debut by Roy Hodgson and put in a decent shift out wide on the left in the absence of Wilfried Zaha, with the new boy impressing the fans. Particularly in the first half, he did well in the air to win a few aerial challenges and looked to get forward whenever he could. He was denied a debut goal by a superb save by Jordan Pickford and showed promise in his first game in English football. Number 3. Benteke's big misses. Christian Benteke had 2 gilt-edged chances with his head, one in each half, but on both occasions his header at goal drifted just wide of the post. They were good chances for the Belgian striker and you would normally expect him to get them on target, but his failure to do so meant that Palace were unable to take the lead or at least get back into the game, proving that fine margins can make a big difference. Number 4. How do you solve a problem like missing Zaha? There is no doubt that Crystal Palace missed Wilfried Zaha and what he brings to the game. They didn't quite have that drive going forward and let creativity out wide, with Everton doubling up on Andros Townsend and largely cutting out the supply from him. Moving forward, they will need to find a way to play without Zaha, whether that will be changing personnel on the wing or the formation, because at Goodison Park they lack that thrust going forward. And number 5, on the spot. No team has been awarded more penalties in the Premier League this season than Palace, with the spot kick awarded to them at Goodison Park being their 7th of the campaign. And Luka Milivojević proved his reliability once again, making it 5 successful penalties from 6 so far this season. In scoring the goal, the Serbian midfielder moved ahead as Palace's top scorer this season with 7 goals, one more than Bakary Sakho. So I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. And also, if you're on Facebook, do feel free to join our Facebook group where you can join in with discussions, share your opinions with other fans, and much like a forum, it's a great place to upload videos, photos, and any news articles you've found online that you do want to share with other Palace fans. And do, of course, join the Facebook group so you can do that. So like I've said there, if you do want to place on Twitter and Facebook to get all the latest Palace news, then of course do follow us on both our accounts at Crystal Palace, because like I said, it's a great place to get all the latest Palace news. We regularly update it, and also when the next podcast will come out, we will upload it to there as well, so you can get up-to-date information about Palace. And in terms of the Facebook group, you know, personally I'm a member of it, so if you ever want to get in contact with me, of course you can do it through there. But personally for me, much like a forum, it's a great place to get into discussions with other fans, so someone could post something in there and you could just comment on it and just, you know, so you can share each other's opinions. And also, if you've got something to share and you want to, you know, tell other fans what you thought about the game, what you thought about a certain player, anything about the club that you want to share, then do of course also to share your opinion so that other fans can also come on there and have discussions with you. And if you think we've missed a news article, then do feel free to tag us in it. And also, if you are in the Facebook group, do post your links in there as well, because I'm sure there'll be a few links we may miss in regarding news. So if you do find any that you want to share, then of course do feel free to put them in there as well. Now, another great place to share your opinion is in the YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, rating the players' performances from 1 to 10, with obviously 10 being the best. And even if you're, even if you're an Everton fan or a Palace fan, and even if you don't want to do your player ratings, then do comment below your views of the game. You know, who you thought the best player was on the pitch, why you thought Palace just lost concentration at the beginning of the second half, whether you do think that Everton did deserve the win, anything like that. Whether you're an Everton or Palace fan, do comment that below. And if you are a Palace fan in particular, then of course leave your player ratings, rating the players from 1 to 10. And that's purely because I can come back and actually see how your player ratings and your perception of players' performances does compare to mine. Because obviously in the podcast, I give you my player ratings, I rate each player's performances. So do drop a comment below with yours as well, so I can compare them against mine. Now also, any other fans who come to the video, whether they're Everton or Palace fans, you know, rather than just listening to my opinion in the podcast, they can also read the comments section as well, just to get an idea of what other fans are thinking, as well as my opinion. And also it's another place where they can of course drop their comments below as well. Now if you do want to follow any of these social media pages or join the Facebook group, then do check all links that will be in the description below. But I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, starting to go with Wayne Hennessy, who I'm going to give a 6. The Welshman had a fairly comfortable first half, making one save to deny Idrissa Gueye. He was unable to do much about the goals. So Wayne Hennessy here, I've given him 6, and much like his performances have been recently, they've steadily been improving and probably have been quite average over the last few weeks, but it's the consistency we've seen from Hennessy in the last few games which had been missing in the last few seasons. Now, something about his game really overall, before I go on to talk about the stuff he did in the game, is really he didn't have much to do, and other than the goals that Everton scored, the 3 goals at the beginning of the first half, or sorry, at the beginning of the second half, there wasn't really much threat from Everton, as there wasn't much threat from Palace. So really, if you look at the game as a whole, yes, he did look comfortable in both halves, but actually it was purely because Everton didn't really have that much threat. And although they scored the 3 goals, which would suggest they had a lot of threat, actually if you look at the game as a whole, bar the first few minutes of that second half, actually he didn't really have too much to do. And that's why I've given him a 6, because it was a pretty average performance. But in terms of his first half, much like they have been recently, it was just a fairly comfortable first half from him. You know, once again, making saves, making catches, everything you would expect him to do. And there was one save in particular from just a guy, which was fantastic. You know, even though he's really tall, he got down low, right to his corner stretch, and was able to put it out for a corner. So, you know, yes, the corner from Sigurdsson wasn't great, and yes, our defending in terms of letting Guy get past Cabaye wasn't great. But, you know, Guy from 25, 30 yards has taken a shot. And, you know, Hennessy, lovely curling effort, but Hennessy's been able to get down low and save it, which was, you know, great to see. And in terms of the second half, I don't think we can blame much or any of the goals, really, any aspect of them on Wayne Hennessy, purely because it was down to poor defending. You know, you look at the first goal, and and Tompkins has tried to head the ball. Obviously his head has gone a bit wayward, and obviously the ball found its way to Sigurdsson, who then has a shot, takes the deflection of Tompkins, which probably wrong foots Hennessy. He manages to go the right way, but because of obviously having that deflection, it sort of off-putted Hennessy, and, you know, he couldn't really do too much about it. And then the other 2 goals, they were just pure bad defending. You know, we were too open at the back, letting crosses come in. And actually, in terms of the third goal, you could say that Hennessy should have done better in terms of Niasse had a shot, Hennessy made the save, and rather than just parrying it out to the side, he maybe should have caught it. But because there were so many players around him, I think the only option he really could have done is to just, you know, pass it out or sort of spread it out into the box. And unluckily for us, even though he'd done that, they got the ball back into the box, and Davies, I believe his name is, was able to score the tap in. So really, he couldn't do too much about it there. So in terms of the goals, can't really put any blame on him for them, purely because it was just down to sort of lapses of concentration and just mistakes from us defensively. So really, we've been playing so well defensively recently, but maybe the fact that we were playing with a slightly different backline seemed to affect our game. Whether it was that or whether it's just, you know, lapses of concentration, I won't know. But personally for me, I don't really think Hennessy had too much say in terms of what he'd done. You know, what happened with the goals. I don't think really we can blame much on him there. But in terms of Hennessy's overall performance, and the main reason I've given him 6 is that although he didn't have to do much in the game, I still thought he looked relatively comfortable in terms of commanding his box, so coming up, catching crosses, punching balls away, which I think he'd done once or twice. And if he didn't, please do correct me. But I'm sure there were a few times with high balls that he either punched them or caught them, which was great to see. He's now starting to improve his, you know, the way he commands the box. And also that great save from Idrissa Gueye as well was quite important in terms of, in the first half, keeping it at 0-0. And although we went on to concede 3 goals, I don't really think we can blame Hennessy for them. So personally for me, I think a 6 is a fair result. And hopefully, because Speroni's injured, Henry is on the bench. He's only played under 23 games. Hopefully Hennessy can step up now, play really good consistently, and hopefully he doesn't get injured. But the final point for me, really, before I go on to talk about the defence, is, you know, his distribution. Because I talked about last week how his distribution was fantastic. You know, every ball was going to Benteke. Benteke was winning nearly 90% of them. Even you could say 99% because he won almost everything. That was great, you know, last weekend against Newcastle. But this weekend here against Everton, Wayne Hennessy's distribution was slightly worse. You know, most of his balls were a bit wayward. There was one that went out for a throw-in on the halfway line. And then there was just a few others where actually, you know, they didn't get to the player they wanted. And because Everton, you know, had so much possession, you could say that actually the fact that Hennessy kept giving the balls away with his distribution, maybe that had, you know, you could say he was at fault for that. The fact that he was just giving the ball away quite freely. But in terms of what he's done recently, it's been really good. But in this game here, hopefully it was a blip, because I personally think his distribution wasn't that great in this game. But do comment below your thoughts of Hennessy, and whether you do think that actually Vicente Gaitan, beginning of next season, signed on a pre-contract, whether you do think that if Hennessy keeps up these performances, whether he'll be straight out the team. So I'm now going to move on to the right back, Joe Ward, who I'm going to give a 6. Returned to the starting lineup and had a steady first half, but the second goal came from his area of the field as Palace failed to clear. So Joe Ward here, I've given him a 6, and before I go on to talk about his performance as a whole, we've got to say he hasn't played since December, so you can understand him having a slight off game here, but actually if you look at the game as a whole, you could argue, even though he wasn't fantastic in the game, he was probably one of our best players, particularly in the first half, because personally for me, when a player's been out for quite some time, it will take them a few weeks to not only get match fit, but just to get back into the game. But I thought that actually at times Joe Ward was one of the best players, and it did actually look like that. It looked like he hadn't been missing from the team in quite a while. But obviously he returned to the starting lineup. Mamadou Sakho somehow got injured on Friday. Don't know how, but our injury luck is horrendous at the minute. He got injured, so Fosu-Mensah, who's played centre-back, not particularly well, but he's played there. He moved to centre-back. Joe Ward came back into the side, played at right-back. And in terms of his first half, like I've already said, I thought it was quite steady. I thought that he was quite good going back and defending. There was a few times where he was able to hold off, or you just use his physicality to hold off attackers. And quite a lot of the time, yes, he wasn't fantastic going forward, but at least he could provide a pass to get attacks going. But the only downside really is, I talked about Hennessy not being at blame for any of the goals because they were sort of defensive errors and sort of lapses of concentration. The second goal, you could argue, was Joe Ward's fault. It was his area of the field which he was meant to be marking. Obviously the balls come in, and because we failed to clear as a team, not just him in particular, but as a team we failed to clear that danger. We obviously got punished because we weren't concentrating, and obviously went down 2-0. But personally for me, Joe Ward, because he's the main man playing on that wing, or that sort of side, he should be the guy who's stopping the likes of Sigurdsson, Niasse, Davies. He should be the one stopping them getting the ball in the area in the first place. Because if we had cleared that ball, then there would be no doubt that they wouldn't have scored from that chance. But because we failed to clear it, and because they were able to get in across from that side, we were obviously punished. But it was that sort of lapse of concentration which cost us in the game. Because in the first half, like I've said, Joe Ward in particular was playing really well. We done really well to frustrate and restrict Everton's chances, and it probably would have been a fair 0-0 if it had ended like that. But a few errors and a few sort of losses of concentration eventually did come on to cost us in the game. But like I've said, in terms of his overall performance, obviously he hasn't played since December, so you can understand him being a bit rusty here and there. And although he made a few good tackles and a few blocks, I think he certainly could have done better in the first half, because if he had sort of emulated his first half performance and brought that into the second, I certainly think we wouldn't have conceded that other goal, because he sure would have stopped that cross coming in, and he would have made that block to stop the chance going in. But overall, he didn't really put a foot wrong. I suppose that's the way to describe his performance, and the reason I've given him a 6. Some may argue because one of the goals in particular was his fault, you could put blame on him. But personally for me, because of how good he played in the first half, and the fact that other than that goal, I don't really think he put a foot wrong playing at right back. For that alone, I'm going to give him a 6. But for me personally, with the injuries we've got at the minute, it's not ideal having Fosu-Mensah playing at centre back. But if it has to be like this, I personally think that at right back, I think that Joe Ward is slightly better. Not because obviously he hasn't got the pace, but I just think that Joe Ward's slightly more better offensively, and there were a few times where he put a few good crosses in. So it's not ideal having Fosu-Mensah at centre back. But I'm sure that, say if Mamadou Sakho comes back, after the FA Cup break, when we play Tottenham, I'm sure that for me, Tompkins and Sakho will be that partnership. And personally for me, based on this performance and the fact that how well Joe Ward played, it would see Fosu-Mensah drop to the bench and Joe Ward continue at right back. But do comment below your views and whether you do think when our injured players come back, whether you do think that Fosu-Mensah or Joe Ward will continue at right back. Now to move on to the centre-back, Timothy Fosu-Mensah, who I am going to give a 5. Played at centre-back in the absence of Mamadou Sakho and did well for the most part, but he and the rest of the Palace defenders will be disappointed with the goals they conceded. So Fosu-Mensah here, I've given him a 5, and arguably you could say that he was probably one of the worst players on the field, and personally for me it's purely because he was playing out of position, because we know, yes, he played at the beginning of the season at centre-back, but for the majority of the time he's been playing at right-back, and he's done reasonably well there, probably a 7 out of 10 there. But because he's moved back to centre-back, maybe because he's been playing quite well recently, at right back. Maybe that seemed to just sort of disrupt his game, and because he was playing out of position, it seemed to affect his game. Because personally for me, he can play alright at centre back. I think he's got the attributes in terms of his tackling and his physicality. But in this game here, you know, when you lose someone as good as Mamadou Sakho, it's going to be quite hard to replace him. And obviously, quite clearly, Fosu-Mensah wasn't quite up to that quality. But the main reason I've given him a 5 is because he was playing at centre back, but really didn't make up for that absence of Mamadou Sakho. But to be honest, if you look at the first half in particular, I thought we'd done well for the most part in that half. But much like everyone else on the field, in that second half it was completely disastrous, and he'll be disappointed with the goals we conceded, because if you look at a few of them, there was one or two where Fosu-Mensah tries to go into a tackle but misses it, which ultimately means Everton are able to get through on goal. And there were quite a few times, much like what I've said with Ward, it's just that lapse of concentration. So rather than just having a football brain, looking at the game and assessing the situation, here just try and be a bit, you know, just try and make a challenge when it isn't the best time to do it, or it's not the right player to do so. And just that sort of, I don't even know how to describe it, but that sort of, let's say, a lack of a football brain, because he's a good footballer in terms of having physicality and pace, but in terms of that football brain and assessing the situation, and in terms of, you know, making that right challenge or that right block, or just staying with the right man, that wasn't quite right in this game. And to be honest, he'd be one of the players most disappointed with his performance, purely because of the goals we conceded. Because if you look at the first goal, you know, yes, Tompkins missed that header, but I'm sure that Fosu-Mensah could have been there to at least try and close down Sigurdsson before he scores the goal. The other few goals, you know, there was just mishaps in the box. You know, the third goal in particular, rather than players just standing in a line, you know, just in front of the goal line, maybe you should actually try and close down players rather than just standing around in a bunch around the box. So there's so many things that he could have done better, and yes, I'm putting quite a lot of the blame on him in terms of giving him a 5. But when you consider, yes, the whole team was bad, yes, you know, you could say I should give less blame to him. But I think in terms of picking out one player in particular who was at fault defensively, I think Fosu-Mensah is that man. Because like I've said, in the first half I thought he was fairly comfortable, but these little lapses of concentration and the lack of a football brain in terms of knowing what to do and when to do it really seemed to affect his game. And whether it's because he's been playing at right back, so he's not quite used to it and hasn't quite adapted back to the centre back role, or whether it's just because Mamadou Sakho, we know how good he was against Newcastle, so we just expected the same standard, and obviously Fosu-Mensah isn't there. Whatever it was, wasn't really playing that well, and like I said, playing at the centre back, he had a quite disappointing performance. So a 5 for him I think is a fair result. You know, in the first half he done fairly well, but in the second half he was at fault for at least 2 of the goals, even though collectively as a team defending was bad. But I personally think for me he did contribute to that bad defending somehow. Now to move on to his centre-back partner, James Tompkins, who I am going to give a 7. Performed superbly in the first half, with a number of vital interceptions, blocks and challenges. Will be frustrated at the manner of the goals he conceded in the second half. So James Tompkins here, I've given him a 7, and in terms of his performance, yes, you could say we conceded 3 goals, but if you put that aside, I thought he had a really superb game overall, especially in the first half. Now the thing that puts him sort of the opposite of Fosu-Mensah in terms of his performance overall, and why I've given Fosu-Mensah a 5 and Tompkins a 7, is purely the fact that Tompkins in the game, yes, you could say the first goal especially, he was at fault for that, but other than that, there were so many vital interceptions, blocks he made, challenges he made, from corners, so many headers. So there were so many things that he'd done in the game which were quite crucial in terms of keeping us in the game. So that's the thing that makes him slightly different from Fosu-Mensah, is the fact that although he was at blame for the first goal in particular, I still thought that he played a vital part in terms of keeping the deficit at a 3 goal, but also helping us to push on in the game. Because there was one tackle in particular from Niasse, so he got the ball off Niasse, great challenge, then picked up the ball and he sprinted up the left hand side, put the ball to Patrick Van Aanholt, he put in a ball to the box, and I think it was Benteke missed a header. So not only was he being good defensively in terms of making these vital challenges, blocks, and obviously winning headers in the air, but also in terms of going forward, he'd win that ball and drive forward, which was obviously great to see. But although he had a great performance, he'll be very frustrated at the way that the goals went in. In terms of the first goal, he went to head the ball, he misheaded it, and much like what Fosu-Mensah could have done, rather than just letting Sigurdsson try and just, you know, have a shot from the edge of the box, just, even though he got a slight deflection on the shot trying to block it, what he should have done is, rather than trying to block it or make a challenge, he should have stopped Sigurdsson from making that shot. So close him down much quicker, making sure he can't get that shot away. And if he does get the shot away, at least try better with the block he made. Because really for me, so that sort of deflection it took off of Tompkins, yes, it wasn't the best, but it seemed to sort of wrong foot Hennessy, and although people will probably blame Hennessy for that, I'm not really going to do that, because Hennessy, you could see, thought it was going to go one place, had that area covered, and because it took that deflection from Tompkins, it seemed to affect the way he was going to go down. So personally for me, Tompkins had a really great performance, but arguably it is a little bit controversial when you lose 3-1 to give a player a 7. But I personally think if you take the goals aside, especially the first one, which was loads of his fault, and if you consider the fact there was just a few moments, 6 minutes of madness where, you know, players lost their concentration, if you put that aside, actually it was a pretty good performance. But in terms of his overall performance, you know, put the goals aside, and the main reason I've given him a 7 is just purely the fact that, like he's done recently, he's impressed at the back, and to be honest, especially in the first half when he was fantastic, I thought he put in a foot when needed, so whenever a challenge had to be made, he was there to do it. And the same with his head, you know, there were so many corners that came in from Everton, and quite a lot of the time I think that Tompkins was there to get his head on it and, you know, make that interception to get the ball away. And the same could be said for blocks and clearances, because that's the main reason for me why I'm not going to put too much blame on the goals we conceded in this game down to him, is purely the fact that other than the goals, I think he was one of our best players, because if it wasn't for the goals, he'd probably get an 8 performance based on how well he performed. But because he was at fault for them goals, the first one especially, that's why I've given him a 7. But do comment below your thoughts on the goals, and obviously your thoughts on Tompkins and Fosu-Mensah's performances, and whether you do think actually that, you know, when Sakho comes back, whether you think he comes straight into the side, whether he's not 100% or not, or whether you do think Fosu-Mensah will continue at centre-back. Because for me, although he can play there in the back three, I don't necessarily think he's the best player there. So for me, James Tompkins, I think a 7 is a fair result. Even though one of the goals was his fault, I think his overall play was pretty good. Now to move on to the left back, Patrick Van Aanholt, who I'm going to give a 6. Tried to get forward as Palace chased the game and delivered a great cross for Sørloth midway through the second half. He was booked though. So Patrick Van Aanholt here, I've given him a 6, and much like his performances have been recently, he's been becoming more consistent in terms of his performances, and actually this was another great showing here. May not necessarily have been great in terms of conceding them 3 goals quite early on in the second half, but I still thought he put himself about a bit, and in terms of his defensive work, I thought he was quite crucial to the way we tried to get back into the game. But the thing, obviously, before I talk about his defensive work, was really, I don't think there's too much blame on him, but I think there's one goal in particular to talk about. But in terms of his overall play, you know, we're chasing the game, we're 2-0 down. What do you need? You need, you know, players to come forth and attack, and I thought that obviously Benteke and Sørloth, who was spearheading the attack, I thought they'd done relatively well. Yes, they didn't take all of their chances, but the fact that they got on the end of chances, like Benteke had 2 or 3 headers, that was obviously great to see. So them two were playing quite good offensively. Obviously Cabaye in behind was doing relatively well, and obviously Patrick Van Aanholt playing on that left hand side, he was the guy who was supplying the attack. So obviously them 3 players were quite good in terms of helping us to, when we were chasing the game, to get back into it. But I still thought that Van Aanholt was actually quite crucial to us getting back into the game, purely because of the amount of crosses he was putting into the area. Now that is something I criticised him for at the beginning of the season, but like I've said, over the last few weeks he's becoming more consistent, not only with his defensive but offensive performances. And actually one of the things that was great about his performance here, and the main reason I've given him a 6 as opposed to a 5 I've seen a few people give him, is purely for that fact, the fact that there was one cross in particular, we're chasing the game, we're trying to get back into the game, he does a lovely 1-2 on the edge of the area, puts a fantastic cross into Sørloth, and if it weren't for Pickford in goal, that would have been a fantastic header into the top corner, and obviously we would have been 2-1 up, 2-1 down at that point, so maybe would have given us a fighting chance to get back into the game. So that's something I liked about his game, the fact that when we were chasing the game, he was still able to go forth and actually create chances and obviously supply for other teammates. And if it wasn't for Pickford making a fantastic save, then there's no way that Sørloth wouldn't have scored that chance, because it was a great bullet header from what was a fantastic cross into the area. Now obviously in terms of the negatives from this game, you know, the positives are the fact that he was fantastic going forward and was mediocre, let's say, defensively, and obviously the crosses were great as well. But in terms of the bad things about the game, he was booked, so not really ideal, but he's one of these players who doesn't really often get booked, so it's not really much of an issue, but he still got booked in the game. And obviously defensively, you know, 2 of the goals, personally for me, out of the 3, not really his fault. They came from the right hand side, and there was one you could say that was his fault in terms of the ball that came down that left hand side, but I'm not really going to put too much blame on him there. purely because it was mainly the centre-backs and Fosu Mensah who, the centre-backs and Joe Ward who had that lapses of concentration and just sort of lost their bearings for a few seconds, which obviously resulted in us making defensive errors, which led to us conceding the goals. So personally for me, I'm not really going to blame him for any of the goals, purely because it was mainly the centre-backs and Joe Ward who were at fault for them with their lapses of concentration. So for me, really, yes, people want to criticise him defensively because we conceded 3 goals, but personally for me, I don't think there's really much fault to be had on him there, and that's why I've given him the 6. But in terms of just an overall summary of the game, I've discussed quite a lot of this already, but he was someone who, playing at left back, tried to get forward as much as possible, especially when we were chasing the game, which was obviously great to see. And some of them crosses, if he weren't for them, we would have had no chances to get back into the game. But the fact that he was constantly getting forward and putting crosses into the box was at least giving us a chance to get back into the game. But unluckily for us, we weren't able to capitalise on them chances, and Pickford made a few good saves, which ultimately meant that we went on to lose the game. But the final point really for me is, people criticise him defensively, but I thought he held his position really well throughout the game. And actually, when you consider Theo Walcott, he's in form at the minute. He scored 2 goals the other week. He's got loads of pace, and I thought that Paciovidano, who's got as much pace as well, I thought he was able to do really well in terms of stopping him and restricting him to chances. And in terms of the one play he had to mark in Walcott, I thought he'd done a really good job there. So Paciovidano here, do comment below with your thoughts, but I personally think a 6 is a fair reflection of his game when you consider he wasn't terrible defensively, and the fact that when we were chasing the game, he was trying to get forward whenever possible to get us back into the game. Now to move on to the captain and midfielder Luka Milivojević, who I am going to give a 6. Got stuck in the middle of the park and had a good shot from distance in the first half. His influence faded in the second half, but he did score the penalty. So Luka Milivojević here, the captain, I've given him a 6 because much like his performances have always been, it was a very consistent performance, nothing really fantastic in the game, nothing really bad, and overall just a real average performance, and hence why I've given him a 6. But in terms of the first half performance, in terms of restricting and frustrating Everton, I thought in the middle of the park he'd done a really good job of that, getting stuck in with a few tackles and blocks here and there, and overall just being a nuisance to Everton and stopping them having chances on goal. So ultimately, protecting the back four, he'd done a fantastic job in the first half. Less so in the second half when we conceded them 3 goals. But personally for me, most of the errors for them came with the 3 right-handed defenders. So you're looking at your 2 centre-backs and the right-back. So personally for me, there's not really much fault, from him for the 2 goals. And actually, if you look at his game as a whole, first half he was fantastic. Second half his influence faded slightly. But I still did think he still had a slight influence in the game. Not necessarily in terms of what he'd done on the pitch, but in terms of being that captain and sort of rallying the players to get something from the game. And as shown by, talking about Paciovidano's performance, we did try to get back into the game, but ultimately it wasn't quite enough. Now, in terms of another thing in his first half performance, which was great to see, was the shot he had from distance. So there was the ball came to him just outside the area. He hit it really nicely, first time finish, and it went just wide. And you probably heard the clatter against the hoardings, which showed that actually there was so much power in that shot that if it had gone in, it probably would have burst the net. So not only is he now, being very good defensively and actually, taking our penalties, but also he's actually starting to get in more advanced positions. And when the ball's coming to him on the edge of the area, he'll have a go. And quite a lot of the times, they're only just off target. So it's great to see that now he's not only being very good defensively, but he's, occasionally going forward. And as seen by that chance there, he's got pretty good shooting ability. So if we can get a few balls to him about 20 yards out, because as shown by that shot there, if he can hit them first time. So maybe we need to get more chances for him there. Now in terms of the second half, I already said that he sort of faded. And he wasn't having as much influence on the game in terms of his playing style in that second half. But he did score the penalty. I think there's no argument. It's a handball from from Williams, I believe his name is. Yeah, I was going to say Ashley Williams. I think that's his name. But yeah, he handballed it in the box. Benteke's tried to overhead kick it. Hit his hand. That's a fair handball. Lucas steps up to take the penalty. Yes, he's missed his one against Man City. And yes, the one against Newcastle almost got saved. But this one here, Pickford did get a hand to it. But much like the penalty against Newcastle, it was so good in terms of the power that he hit it. And, there was nothing he could do about it, purely because it was so powerful that it was already going in. So yes, obviously we know that he's got a pretty good, decent penalty record. But the last few, the goalkeepers have almost caught them. But the fact is, he's got so much power on it, is obviously the fact that, gets it into the goal, and that's what we need to see from him. We need someone who's not only confident when they step up to take a penalty, but someone that even if the goalkeeper is close to getting it, they put so much power and position into it that actually there's no chance that they can save it. So personally for me, overall, brilliant in the first half, slightly faded in the second half, but did score that penalty, so that sort of bunks up his score for me, which obviously gives him the overall 6. But like I've said, in terms of his game overall, he wasn't fantastic, but I still thought he was relatively solid in the middle of the park. And although we didn't win that midfield battle purely because the likes of Cabaye and McArthur didn't quite have a control on the game, I still thought that Milivojević done his part to try and get possession for the team. But when you've got someone like a Sam Allardyce team that when you give them possession they can do quite a lot with it, is obviously the fact that we had slightly less possession meant that Everton had a slightly more bigger control of the game. But Luka Milivojević here, the captain, I've given him a 6. He was pretty good in the second half, faded slightly in the second, but did score that consolation penalty to get us back into the game. So overall I think a 6 is a fair result for him. Now to move on to his midfield partner, Yohan Cabaye, who I am going to give a 6. The Frenchman put in a battling display in the midfield and delivered a couple of good crosses into the box from deep. So Yohan Cabaye here, I've given him a 6, and much like the performance of Milivojević, there was nothing fantastic in the game, but there was nothing really terrible from him, and overall I think a 6 is a sort of an average reflection of his game. Now in terms of what he'd done in the game, I thought much like Milivojević in the middle of the park, I thought he battled quite well in the midfield, so although we didn't win that midfield battle, I still thought he was putting himself about a bit. And the thing I liked about Cabaye's performance is, although he was sort of sitting quite deep next to Luka, I still thought quite a lot of the times he was actually advanced forward, and actually there were a few times where he delivered quite a good number of crosses, and that's something that we seen from him last season, against West Brom for example, where he picked up the ball from deep, pull it long to Zaha, we scored, and we saw that quite a lot in this game. I talked about Van Aanholt's cross to Sørloth to score, but actually that came from Cabaye putting a lovely crossfield ball to Patrick Van Aanholt, lovely control there, and then he was the one who put the cross into Sørloth. So Cabaye, not only in terms of playing alongside Luka, was good defensively, I still thought going forward in terms of supplying them crossfield balls and numerous other crosses as well from deep, I thought that was obviously great to see as well. And the thing that I liked about his performance is, unlike a few of the other players, the likes of McArthur, who I'll talk about in a minute, I thought that Cabaye actually looked like he was trying to get involved whenever possible, and he was battling in midfield, so it was a very battling display. And although it was quite difficult in terms of Everton having slightly more control and the fact that we conceded them goals early on, yes, Everton were not necessarily the better side because it was quite an even first half, but because Everton, got them 3 goals quite early on, it seemed to knock our confidence. But I still thought that Cabaye battled through and tried to get something from the game. And like I've said with Patrick Van Aanholt, in terms of the 3 players plus Patrick who were actually trying to help on and push us to win the game, I thought that Cabaye was one of these players who was actually trying to put pressure on Everton to at least get a consolation goal, which we eventually did. But there were a few chances where actually he could have supplied the attackers to score, and also he had a few chances himself. And much like Luka in this game, when he was in advanced positions, he had a few shots from distance. One of them was going bottom corner, fantastic save once again from Pickford. So once again showing that both Luka and Cabaye, when they are allowed to advance forward, they can have a few shots from goal. And it's not only their defensive work which is quite crucial, but their shooting ability from far out is actually pretty decent as well. So Yohan Cabaye here, a 6 from him. He hasn't necessarily been great in the last few weeks, but I thought here he was probably one of our more positive, probably one of our best players, you could argue. And like I said already, the word I would use to describe his display is battling, because I thought he'd done exactly that in the game. So Yohan Cabaye here, I think a 6 is a fair result. Delivered quite a few good crosses into the box from deep, and hopefully in the next few games this sort of midfield partnership seems to be working well in terms of Milivojević and Cabaye. So hopefully in the next few weeks we can see that partnership develop more. Now to move on to James McArthur, who I am going to give a 5. This wasn't the Scottish international's best game, with McArthur struggling to get on the ball in midfield and conceding a few free kicks. So James McArthur here, I've given him a 5, and unlike the performance against Newcastle where second half he was arguably one of our best players, this was a slightly more under par performance from McArthur when you consider how well he played in that Newcastle game, and we actually thought it'd be quite crucial to at least get in something against Everton, but it wasn't to be, because personally for me, playing in behind the striker, I thought he'd done really well against Newcastle, but he couldn't quite bring that sort of level of performance into this game, and overall it was quite a disappointing game from him, hence why I've given him a 5. But in terms of just his overall performance, if I had to describe his performance, I'd just say it wasn't his best game. You know, every so often players have an off game, and this was just one of McArthur's off games. Because once again, like I said, he played really good last weekend, and he just, you know, had one game off here. But in terms of why he didn't have the best game, I thought that unlike Cabaye and Milivojević, I thought he struggled to get on the ball in the midfield. So with him playing sort of, I wouldn't say he was playing mainly out wide, but he was drifting from out wide down the middle. But even though he was doing that, he seemed to struggle to get on the ball quite a lot. So he was the guy meant to be linking up, you know, Sørloth, Benteke and the midfield. But personally for me, I don't think he'd done that a lot. He didn't really struggle. He struggled to get on the ball, and because of that, we had to get long balls from the likes of Cabaye and Van Aanholt to actually get the ball to the attackers, purely because McArthur wasn't exactly doing his job, purely because he wasn't really getting on the ball enough. And to be honest, yes, it wasn't great that he wasn't getting on the ball, but at least, you know, he could have at least tried to create some space for others to get into. He didn't do that, and, you know, the other bad thing is the fact that he was conceding free kicks. So not only was he not getting on the ball in the midfield, but also there was quite a lot of free kicks that he conceded right on the edge of our area. Obviously none of them did punish us, but it's just, you know, the likes of Gylfi Sigurdsson, who's scored free kicks against us before, is obviously quite daunting when you give away free kicks. So, like I've said, not only was his performance bad in terms of struggling to get on the ball, and he, you know, because of that he weren't linking up the attack in the midfield, but also he was just giving away needless free kicks quite a lot of the time. But I suppose looking back at the game, you would say that actually we stopped them having a shot in that instance and they missed it. So actually it was a good free kick to concede. But overall, I don't really think that, you know, the free kick we did concede did really help us in the grand scheme of things. But in terms of the free kicks themselves, like I've said already, Gylfi Sigurdsson, he scored a few against Palace. And, you know, yes, obviously he isn't ideal giving free kicks away, but McArthur gave them away in such good areas for Everton that we probably could have even seen 2 or 3 goals in the first half, purely because of the amount of chances that Everton had from free kicks. But to be honest, overall, just summarising his performance, the main reason I've given him a 5 is not just because it was not his best game, but mainly the reason for me is the fact that he struggled to get on the ball in midfield, and when he did get on the ball, he didn't really do much with it. And personally for me, yes, Roy Hodgson once again, for whatever reason, didn't make a sub, but personally for me, I would have brought on someone like Rakip or Riedewald, because I think that Riedewald especially would have actually changed the game, because I think that McArthur wasn't really playing that well, and I'm sure that sort of injection of pace off the bench would have been slightly better, you know, to help us at least push on and get something from the game. So Jason McArthur here, slightly disappointing performance, and I personally think it warrants a 5. You know, struggled to get on the ball in the midfield, which obviously meant that he wasn't able to link up the midfield and the attack, and he obviously conceded quite a large number of free kicks. Now to move on to the winger, Andros Townsend, who I'm going to give a 6. Got into some good positions going forward, but lacked that quality at times with his final pass. So Andros Townsend here, I've given him a 7, and unlike his performance against Newcastle, where he was slightly disappointing playing against his old club, I thought he had a reasonably good game here. Not fantastic, but I still thought that he had some sort of attacking impetus in this game, and actually I think he does deserve to get the 6. Now in terms of what he did in the game, you know, I thought he was quite average between both halves, so I don't think he was particularly good in one half in particular. So unlike a few players in the team where they were really good in the first half, less so in the second half, I think that Townsend was quite average along both halves. But in terms of what he did in both halves, I thought that quite a lot of the time he was getting into some good positions going forward. So once again, using his pace to get in behind, get crosses into the box. And when we've got, you know, Sørloth, who's 6'3", you've got Benteke, who's 6'2", when you've got them in the box, you've got to try and get crosses into them, which admittedly he did do. But most of the time his crosses did lack that quality, and quite a lot of the time it wasn't just crosses, but sometimes that final pass as well. Sometimes it's not just about knocking the ball into the box for someone to head. Maybe it's just about a pass on the foot or just a long ball from your foot. Maybe that would have been more sufficient a few times. But, you know, whether it was crossing or some of these passes, I do think that final sort of pass did lack in the game. And we know that he likes to take shots from distance, but we didn't even see that in this game. But personally for me, the fact that he had that intent to go forward, much like Patrick Van Aanholt, the fact that he was trying to get us back into the game by actually attacking down that right hand side was obviously, of course, great to see. Now obviously in this game, because Everton, you know, Sam Allardyce knows our team very well, so he obviously knew how to deal with Andros Townsend. So he knew that, you know, not to give him many opportunities on the ball, and that's exactly what Everton did. They restricted his chances on the ball, and because of that, because he didn't have many opportunities on the ball, he of course wasn't able to create any chances. But despite that, I still thought that he looked to at least get something from the game. So he was always looking to get involved when he could. So he wasn't just, you know, lazing around, just being a passenger in the side. Even though he didn't have that many chances, whenever he did get a chance, he was trying to get the most out of it. And even if he wasn't getting, involved, he was still trying to get involved with some of the plays. So personally, for me, I thought that although he necessarily didn't have the best game in terms of quality, but the fact that he had that intent and wanted to get involved was of course great to see. And the final thing for me really is his defensive duties. So we know that, you know, obviously it's not ideal going 3-0 down at the beginning of the first half. That's obviously purely down to the lapses of concentration from the defence. But I still thought quite a lot of the time when we were under pressure, obviously we were lacking confidence because we were 3-0 down, and Everton were having confidence because they've scored 3 goals. And because of that, we were under a bit of pressure. But I still thought that our back four done reasonably well, and the fact that they got support from Townsend, who came back and done his defensive duties as well, which obviously, you know, added to his performance. And for me, I probably, you know, the fact that he had that defensive work is what propped it up to a 6 for me, because if you look at his chances he had in the game and the positions he was positioned offensively in the game, yes, they weren't great, but I still thought that the fact that he had attacking intent plus with the defensive duties, I do think that sort of rounds up to an average 6 performance from him. So do comment below what you think about Townsend's performance, and whether you do think the front three of Andros Townsend, Alexander Sørloth and Christian Benteke could work for us coming forth this season. Now to move on to the striker Alexander Sørloth, who I am going to give a 7. Making his debut for Palace, he put in a good shift, playing out wide. He won several headers and almost scored with a good header in the second half. So Alexander Sørloth here, I've given him a 7, and I personally thought that, I've given him a 7, so obviously he's one of the best players on the pitch, but I personally thought on his debut, when you consider he hasn't played in the Premier League before, I actually thought he put in a fantastic performance. And when you consider he's 22 years old, he's only played in sort of lower level leagues, not necessarily in terms of their position in that country, but he's played in slightly lower leagues. But I still thought that actually coming into the Premier League with the physicality, with the pace, I thought he'd done reasonably well. And in terms of playing up front with Benteke, I actually thought they had a really good partnership together. But obviously he was making his debut for Palace since signing for us on deadline day. He was obviously on the bench against Newcastle. I would have personally liked to see him feature, but he didn't. But he got his chance here against Everton, and personally for me, he definitely took it because he impressed not only me, but quite a lot of fans. And to be honest, in a game where we lost 3-1, he was probably one of the main sort of positives to take from the game. But in terms of his overall performance, I think you could say that he had a really good shift. So not only was he, you know, getting forward to obviously get on the end of chances, but also he was drifting out wide, because obviously he's played out wide in Norway, I believe it is. But he was also looking to not only go forward himself, but also putting a few crosses into the area. And there was one in particular to Christian Benteke, put the ball in, Benteke headed just wide, and MacArthur couldn't quite latch on to the ball there. So not only was he being good in terms of getting on the end of chances, but also he was creating chances for his teammates as well. And if you've got someone who's not only looking to supply for himself or getting the end of attempts for himself, but if you've got someone who's also looking to create for his teammates, that's of course great to see. And you know, when you're playing a 4-4-2, it's always quite crucial that you have players drifting out wide to enable, you know, more space to be created and for them to create chances inside the box. So obviously that was obviously great to see as well. But in terms of his performance overall, you know, we know how tall he is. He's taller than Benteke, so we've got 2 physical, tall strikers up front, and he used that to his advantage, which was obviously great to see. You know, he won loads of headers in the game, and there was one in particular, you know, I talked about the pass or the cross from Patrick Van Aanholt, came on right onto the head of Sørloth, and Sørloth, fantastic bullet header, and obviously Pickford made a fantastic save. So not only was Sørloth actually supplying the ball for Benteke to head down, but also Sørloth was able to get on the end of that, you know, of that ball himself. Great bullet header, using his height to his advantage, using his lovely his spring in his leg to get high up and head it down. And obviously quite unlucky for us that Pickford made a fantastic save, because I'm sure if it was another keeper, maybe he would have made a save but spooled it out into the box, or maybe they wouldn't have made a save purely because of how powerful the header was from Sørloth. But to be honest, that was obviously great to see. from him, and I personally think he does deserve the 7. Not only because of the chances he had in terms of, you know, testing the goalkeeper, but I thought that overall his attacking play was really good to see. But to be honest, obviously with him playing up front with Benteke, he was the one who was predominantly drifting out wide, obviously to try and create chances for Benteke, and I thought that sort of partnership where you have someone who stays central, one drifts out wide onto the left hand side, was great to see as well. And much like Andros Townsend, I thought that he obviously tried to get forward as much as possible. But the main thing for me, really, the main thing I've given him a 7 is, you know, people say that when players come from other leagues, they're not up to that physicality of the Premier League. But the fact that Sørloth won so many headers in that first half especially, and was really direct going forward, really powerful with his runs forward, using his pace, that was obviously great to see as well. And there was one moment in particular where long ball forward, Mangala, I believe it was, maybe it was Mangala or someone else, but basically they miscontrolled the ball, and Sørloth basically bodied him to the ground, picked the ball off of him, went to put the cross in, and obviously that was cleared for us. But the fact that he was able to body a player and actually get past him with his pace was obviously great to see as well. It may have been Martina or Mangala, one of the other. Obviously Sørloth was able to, you know, basically just sort of shove them off, which shows that actually people may question his physicality in terms of moving up to the Premier League, but I still thought he'd done a decent job there. So do comment below what you think of Sørloth's performance here, whether you do think he does deserve a 7. But personally for me, in a game which was really quite depressing in terms of losing 3-1, I think that he was one of our main positives to take from the game. And in terms of what I saw with his partnership with Benteke, with the chances he'd had, and just that attacking intent he has, he does look like quite a solid signing for us. So before we go and judge him, you know, we've got to see him in a few more games, but so far it does look good. Now to move on to our final player and striker, Christian Benteke, who I'm going to give a 5. He was largely ineffective but had 2 good chances with his head. Unfortunately on both occasions they drifted just wide, and were both at crucial times as the misses proved costly. Overall play was good and is getting better, but he needs to finish these chances. So Christian Benteke here, I've given him a 5, and he is the centre of quite a lot of abuse at the minute and quite a lot of criticism for his performances. But overall, other than the chances he missed in the game, which were obviously quite crucial and obviously proved costly for us, if you take them chances away, I thought that alongside Sørloth he had an overall quite good performance. You know, people are quite quick to criticise him because he misses chances, but actually if you look at his overall game in terms of the hold-up play and in terms of the chances he creates for other players, he's doing pretty well there. But obviously as a striker we need to see him creating more chances and actually taking these chances, because at the moment the chances he's missing, everyone that goes by, we're being punished by it, because I'm sure that if he had taken a few of his chances in the first and second half respectively, I'm sure that we probably would have had 2, maybe you could even say 3 goals in the game, purely based on the chances that Benteke had in the game. But to be honest, most people will probably say he's ineffective, and you know, I'm not saying that because he played terribly in the game. I'm purely saying he was ineffective because as a striker you're meant to score goals, and he missed loads of chances to score goals. And unlike the game against Newcastle, there was no one-on-one situation, so it wasn't like his shooting was bad, it was just that his headers were slightly off target. But like I've said already, there was 2 headers in particular, they were great chances with his head, and you know, the Christian Benteke of last season would have scored them and would have put them top corner. But unfortunately for us, both of them efforts drifted just wide, so it wasn't like they were terrible, they were just slightly off target, which ultimately, the fact that he's now hopefully going to start getting more of them, hopefully he'll start to improve, and alongside Sørloth, having that sort of person to help him, hopefully that will see him actually take a few of these chances. But them 2 chances he had were at crucial times for us. You know, in the first half we could have got that first goal, in the second half we could have got back into the game with that chance. So really for me, you know, yes, obviously we can talk about, yes, we lost the game because of our defence, but also we lost the game because at crucial times in the game where we could have scored, we didn't, because Christian Benteke missed these chances. But overall, I know that lots of people criticise him, and I think some of the criticism is unwarranted in terms of saying he's absolutely terrible. And ultimately, yes, he's missing chances, so he's not necessarily that good. But I still think, other than the chances he missed, I thought he overall had a really good game. And it's actually quite good to see that his partnership with Sørloth is actually quite good. So hopefully that can develop over the next few games. But like I said, yes, he misses chances, but his overall play was good in this game, and actually over the last few games he's been getting better. But in terms to up his performance even more, we obviously need him to finish these chances and start scoring a few more goals. But like I've said, in terms of that one header in particular, just looking it up now, his first chance with his head was obviously just before half time. Obviously it headed just wide, but to be honest, yes, people could criticise him quite a lot and say he's ineffective, but quite a lot of the time in this game he was quite isolated up top as well. So yes, Sørloth was getting the ball from the midfield and actually driving out wide, but there was no, because of the likes of MacArthur not playing well, there was that no connection between the midfield and the attack. So quite a lot of the time, unless Benteke or Sørloth drifted out wide, they didn't actually get much of the ball and they were quite isolated at times. So much like the theme was last season in terms of Benteke being isolated, some could argue he was isolated in this game, but I'm not really going to talk too much about that, purely because the main reason he had a bad game is purely because of the chances he missed. But do comment below your thoughts about Benteke and whether you do think he'll ever score a goal again, and whether you do actually think that he's playing bad, because I know there's a lot of division in opinions as to whether he's just playing bad or whether it's just he's playing good, he's just missing chances. So do comment below what you think, and do think, comment below whether you do think that when the likes of Zaha and Gylfi Sigurdsson, for example, come back from injury, whether you do think that if Sørloth continues to play so well, whether you do think Benteke could potentially be dropped to the bench in order to allow Sørloth to show what he can do. So do comment below with your thoughts there. Now once again, Roy Hodgson decided not to make any subs in this game, so instead of obviously talking about the subs which I'd normally do in this section, as there wasn't any, I'm just going to give you a small summary of the game as I would normally do, just to give you an idea of just the game overall, not necessarily the players in particular, but just overall the performance of the team. So to be honest, up until half time, so the first half in particular, it was really even. So if it had finished 0-0 at that point, you probably would have said it is a fair result. Both teams were nullified each other and both teams were neither defensively or offensively fantastic. So overall, you would have said before half time, pretty average game for both sides, and a draw would have been a fair result. But the thing that cost us was just this crazy 6 minutes. So in terms of the 2 goals we conceded right at the beginning of the first half, they weren't necessarily fantastic goals from Everton. It was just really, a loss of concentration. So players forgetting who to mark and players just letting players get past them freely, and because of that lack of concentration, that led to defensive mistakes, and Everton of course did punish us. But if it wasn't for them lapses of concentration, as shown in the first half and towards the end of the second half, we probably would have gone on to draw the game, or potentially if we hadn't have made them 3 mistakes which led to the goals, potentially we could have won the game with Luka's penalty. Because personally for me, Everton, other than the goals they scored, much like us, weren't really necessarily fantastic offensively. And actually, if you look back at the stats, we had more shots than them, which just showed that actually, in terms of a threat, we were the much better threat. But, we weren't that good because we didn't take our chances. But overall, the main reason we lost this game is not necessarily because the performance was bad. It was purely because of that crazy six minutes where obviously the defence forgot how to defend, and obviously they had a lack of concentration. Now obviously after that, you're 3-0 down midway through the second half. What do? You try and push back and try and get back into the game. Palace done exactly that. We pushed to get a consolation, which we eventually did with Luka Milivojević's penalty. But also in the game, I still thought that we created many chances. So we're 3-0 down. We've got nothing to lose other than conceding a 4th goal. So we tried to go up and at least get a consolation. We did, and we probably could have even gone on to make it 2-3. Or maybe even gone on to get it to 3-3, purely because of the amount of chances we had, because we were pushing hard to get back into the game, and ultimately we had so many chances and we got that consolation. So maybe possibly if we had taken our chances better, we could have got something better from the game. Now in terms of just going through a few of the stats, in terms of shots, Everton had 11, we had 16. Possession, Everton had slightly more with 53.1. Pass success rate was 77 for both teams. So in terms of that, both teams weren't necessarily good in terms of distributing the ball. In terms of dribbles, Everton had slightly more with 20 compared to Palace's 13. In terms of aerial duels won, so Benteke and Sørloth playing well offensively there, 14 compared to Palace's 26, which just shows our direct style of play. Everton had 1 more corner than us with 8. And in terms of being dispossessed, and if you look back at the 6 minutes of madness, we got dispossessed, and obviously in the game as a whole we had 10 compared to Everton's 5. So that just once again is just highlighting the fact that if it weren't for them crazy 6 minutes where we forgot how to defend and we lost our concentration, we probably could have eventually got something from the game. But just to talk about the shots in a little bit more detail, obviously I said that Everton had 11 shots, we had 16. We had slightly more shots off target with 5 compared to Everton's 2, but we had more shots blocked, 7 compared to 4, which just shows that actually, although we missed quite more chances, we still had more chances than Everton, and obviously because they were blocked, obviously showing that Everton had to defend our chances. And obviously Everton had 1 more shot on target with 5, but the fact that it was pretty even, it was only 1 different, just shows that actually we were both creating chances and we were just unlucky that we didn't take our chances. Now in terms of the top players, you know, Benteke, he was the top in terms of 5 shots on goal, so although people will criticise him, he was one of the biggest attacking threats for us. Same with Patrick Van Aanholt, you know, he had 3 shots in the game, Benteke had 5, and Johan Cabaye as well had 2 shots as well. So obviously out of all of our shots, them players in particular, you know, Cabaye's long range efforts, Patrick Van Aanholt's long range effort as well, and obviously a few of Benteke's shots, one of which led to the penalty. So overall you could say yes, it was bad, the fact that we didn't take our chances, but you know, at the beginning of the season we were saying we weren't creating enough chances, whereas now we're creating loads of chances but we're not taking them. But to be honest, we pushed and pushed to try and get back into the game. Eventually we got the consolation, but it was too little too late, you know, much what has been the theme of our season so far. And to be honest, like I've said already, if it wasn't for them little mistakes and them loss of concentration, we probably would have gone on to get a draw, purely because of, you know, the fact that we still were in the game. If we hadn't have conceded them 3 goals, and we probably, like I've said, would have gone on to get something from the game. But like I've said, these little mistakes, the loss of concentration and the chances we missed, if we had not made these mistakes, not lost our concentration and not, you know, missed the chances and scored them, then we probably would have gone on to get a draw, or even if we didn't make the mistakes, we probably could have even gone on to get the win. But for me, really, the only real positive was Alexander Sørloth. You know, I talk about him quite a lot in the player ratings, but personally for me, obviously he was young. People said, you know, he may not be ready for the Premier League because he hasn't played since November, and obviously the Premier League is a big step up from the Norwegian League. But I personally thought he done a fantastic job in terms of winning loads of headers, and much like what Zaha has been, you know, he's not necessarily on the same level as Zaha, but he came in to replace Zaha, and much like what Zaha is every week, I think that he was a constant threat here. You know, I'm not saying he was on the same level, but the fact that he was a constant threat was obviously great to see as well. And one cross in particular to Benteke, which Benteke put just wide and MacArthur couldn't quite connect on it, that cross was obviously fantastic as well, because not only was Sørloth winning loads of headers and obviously being a constant threat, but also he was the guy supplying the ball for Benteke to head as well. But to be honest now, obviously just to summarise the game, or just to move away from the game of my summary, you know, our next few games are very difficult with Tottenham, Liverpool and United, with Huddersfield in there as well. So really it's going to be difficult, you know, the next few games, but hopefully we've got a 2-week break here, obviously because we're not involved in the FA Cup, so hopefully that will give us a chance to regroup, get a few players back from injury. So Roy Hodgson has said he's hopeful that maybe 2 players will be back, so personally for me it's probably Kelly and Sacco. So hopefully over this FA Cup week we can get our players back from injury and hopefully just prepare for what will be a difficult game, or difficult run of games, because you know, we know that Tottenham and Liverpool are going to be really difficult games, and United are hot and cold this season. And when you consider I'm recording this on Sunday night and United have just lost to Newcastle, hopefully, I'm not going to say we are going to beat United, but at least it will give us a little bit of a chance if we can get some of our players back from injury. So the next few games are going to be really, really difficult, but the fact that we've got a 2-week break, plus after the Tottenham game, I believe I think it's after the Tottenham game we've also got another international break or somewhere near there. The fact that we've got these 2 breaks coming up, hopefully that will allow us to prepare for these hard games. And even though we're probably not going to win any of them, hopefully, you know, personally for me, it's the games that are after it that are much more important. So hopefully, yes, the next few games are going to be difficult, but hopefully with players coming back from injury and just with us preparing, hopefully we can get something from them. So I'm now going to move on to my Man of the Match award. But before I do that and give you my Man of the Match, you know, I thought the biggest influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. So obviously, unlike the performance against Newcastle, where although the first half performance wasn't great in terms of us conceding the first goal in the first half, in the second half against Newcastle I thought our performance did improve. And much like in this game here against Everton, it was a very juxtaposition in terms of the first half and the second half performance. You know, the first half was reasonably good from Palace here, and obviously the second half where we conceded 3 goals, that was the complete opposite. So unlike the Newcastle game where the first half was terrible, second half was better, I think the game here against Everton was still juxtaposition, but just the other way round, with the first half being slightly better than the second half was. But for me personally, yes, it was a disappointing result, but I do think there was 4 players in particular which did obviously shine for me, and obviously I personally thought had the least blame in terms of us conceding the 3 goals. So them four nominations are James Tompkins, Patrick Van Aanholt, Luka Milivojević and Alexander Sørloth. So in terms of James Tompkins, I thought that in the first half especially, which was our better half, I thought he performed superbly in terms of making a number of vital interceptions, blocks and challenges. And unlike, someone like Fosu-Mensah who was directly at blame for one of our goals, although Tompkins did miss the header, I don't think he was necessarily at blame too much for the goals we conceded. And, although we did concede them goals as a fault because of the defence as a whole, I still do think that actually if you put that goal, or you put them 3 goals aside, I personally thought he had a really good overall performance, and that's why I've given him a 7 in the player ratings, because I thought his overall performance was great. Obviously, Patrick Van Aanholt playing at left back. Obviously, we were trying, we're in behind in the game. We're trying to push forward, trying to get something from the game. And I thought that Van Aanholt was one of our biggest attacking threats. He tried to get forward as much as possible. And in terms of one thing in particular, he wasn't just only getting forward, but also he's putting in quite a number of crosses into the box. One in particular to Sørloth was great. Lovely long ball from Kabay. Van Aanholt's controlled it and then put in a fantastic cross to Sørloth, and only a fantastic save from Pickford has obviously stopped him scoring there. So not only was Van Aanholt reasonably good defensively, but going forward he was opposing a threat, whether that was having shots himself, one which was saved by Pickford, or supplying the strikers. Obviously either way they were good. And in terms of Milivojević, the captain, I thought that in the first half especially, he got stuck in the middle of the park. He had a shot from distance which was really great in the first half, picked up the ball on the edge of the area, one touch, went just wide. And obviously he did score the penalty as well. Yes, Pickford got a hand to it, but like I've said, the fact that Milivojević put so much power onto it made sure without a doubt that it was going in. And the fact that he put so much power on it meant that it was difficult for Pickford to save, and ultimately it did go in. So Luka here, yes, he may not have had the best second half, but his first half performance and the fact that he scored the penalty was obviously great to see as well. And as a captain, I think he commanded the side really well. And the final player, new signing Alexander Sørloth, he was making his debut for Palace. That didn't seem to affect him. And actually I thought he put in a really decent shift. He was playing out wide, playing down the middle. Wherever he was making an impact. In terms of going forward, he was not only looking to get on the end of chances himself, but in the fact that he won several headers and obviously almost scored with one fantastic header in the second half from Van Aanholt's cross, but he was also looking to supply. So there was one ball in particular where he chipped the ball into the area for Benteke. Yes, Benteke headed wide, but the fact that Sørloth is not only able to head the balls himself, but also able to put crosses in the area in the first place was obviously great to see as well. But for me, yes, it's a disappointing performance, but like I said at the end of the player ratings, for me there's only one player that stands out for me, and that is Alexander Sørloth. So congratulations, Alexander. Yes, it's only your first appearance for Palace, you're making your debut, but what a debut it was. Yes, obviously it wasn't ideal in the fact that we lost the game, but I do think that your performance here was quite promising, and hopefully we can see more from you this season. But the main reason he's got it above the other players is purely the fact that he had so much attacking influence in the game, and actually, like I've said, he was one of our, basically one of our positives from the game. The rest of the team were, in terms of someone like Luka and Tompkins, they were in and out of the game and sort of had better first halves than their second halves. And obviously Van Aanholt, other than a few crosses, he didn't really do that much fantastic in the game. So for me, Alexander Sørloth has got it purely because of the amount of chances he had in the game and how good they were, but also the fact that he was obviously trying to create them for his teammates as well. But overall, he does look like a promising signing, and hopefully over the next few weeks we can see more from him. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my man of the match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson and Alexander Sørloth following the game.
Crystal Palace debut. First of all, your reaction to the match from your personal performance. How did it go?
No, I'm never satisfied if I don't score. That's how I see it. But I had some good actions, but it wasn't enough today.
After a goalless first half, it was disappointing to concede so early in the second, and we had plenty to play in the second half, but just couldn't create the chances.
That's the thing. We were not creating enough on the last third. We should have, but still we had some chances that could have gone our way, and maybe the game would have been differently.
a couple of games now. How have you settled in during the week? How have you settled in at the club so far?
Really fast. It's a good group of guys who's treating me well, and also the manager, he believes in me. I can feel that, so it makes it easier.
And of course, in the remaining 11 games or so, it's just a case of trying to just repeat the form that we've been on, that run of recent weeks.
Yeah, and hopefully we will get the guys back from injury, and then we have a much stronger side, I think. Yeah, just have to keep fighting and get those points.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Roy, it all went wrong at the start of the second half.
Yes, it did. I mean, first half I thought we were good value, certainly for the 0-0 coming in half time, and we were even quite confident we could keep that going, but that very early goal and then followed up not so long after by the second one, it really puts you on the back foot. And although I thought there were times in the second half where we actually played some reasonable football, it was always going to be difficult to get back. And the third goal really effectively killed us off. But we pulled one back towards the end, and it was a sterling effort from the players. I can't ask more for them in terms of the way they went about their business and the way they worked hard. But unfortunately, it wasn't to be today, and we have to accept we've been beaten.
Was it a lack of concentration in those 6 minutes?
No, I don't think so. It was a very long clearance, wasn't it? And James Tompkins' header, unfortunately went right up into the air, and then we didn't get onto the second ball quick enough, and the shot came in and it was deflected, which is very difficult for the goalkeeper. So I wouldn't call it concentration. Obviously all goals are errors, technical errors or tactical errors, but it was a clear error, as all goals are, but I wouldn't put it down to a lack of concentration, no.
You had one penalty. Could you have had another one, did you feel?
Not that I saw. I mean, to be honest, when you're on the touchline so far away from things, and it was a very vociferous shout from the players, so I presume that something must have happened for them to react so quickly and so spontaneously, and the referee was on the spot and gave it. But I didn't see any other opportunities in terms of penalties, no.
There seemed to be another claim of handball that seemed quite similar to that one, but I guess sometimes you get them, sometimes you don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of claims for handball are when balls strike people. I don't know that they are often these days as deliberate as people would sometimes suggest that they are, but no, I'm not going to make any complaints in that respect. I thought that we made our mistakes for the goals and were punished for them, and the rest of the time I thought that we put up a reasonable show. But as you rightly said, to go 2-0 down reasonably early in the second half, we gave ourselves a mountain to climb.
Obviously we know the struggles that you've had with injuries. Is your overriding feeling pleasure that you created the chances, or frustration that you didn't take them, given that injury list as well?
Well, I suppose there's a certain frustration at the moment that we certainly haven't had things going our way, in particular with injuries. It's unusual to have quite so many players out, and what's more, not just any players, players who are an integral part of our first team. So, we feel that we haven't been blessed with any good fortune there, but having said that, I still think that the players that played today, the 11 that started the game, I thought they gave a good account of themselves, really, and we didn't lose the game because we were lacking any of those other players. We lost it because, unfortunately, the mistakes that we made were punished by Everton.
And finally, you've got a very tough run coming up, 4 of your next 5 games against teams in the top 6. How do you give your team the maximum amount of confidence going into these matches off the back of a defeat as well?
Well, always off the back of defeats. Defeats do eat into your confidence, just as victories, of course, boost your confidence, and everybody knows that. But we've been working together long enough now that the players are aware of what they are capable of. They're aware of what they need to do. I'm rather hoping in these 2 weeks we'll recover maybe a couple of players, perhaps even more if we were very, very lucky. And in terms of the quality of opponents, every game's a difficult one. It's you can't rank them in the way that this is a game we can win, this is a game we can't win. We have to believe that every game we play is going to be a real scrap and a real fight to get anything from the game. And we've got just as much chance of scrapping and fighting against the teams above us as we have at the teams below us. If there are any teams below us, that is, of course.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson and Alexander Sørloth had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Everton. but make sure to come back in 2 weeks' time for my post-match review of the game against Tottenham. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.